Hi everyone, I am Josh. Welcome back to my channel. Hopefully you see my September TBR by the time this goes up, but I'm here. I'm catching back up with the shit that I've fallen behind on, and today I want to talk to you about the books that I read in July and August. It hasn't been a great reading summer as I finish my PhD and round out my reading, move out of Canada, back home, at least for the time being. More on that in other videos, but I want to catch up. I want to tell you about what I've read, what I managed to read at least. Not that much, so this video shouldn't be too long, hopefully, even though it is 2 months worth of reading. But let's just talk about all the books that I read this summer, I guess. Okay, we're looking at 5 books. That's not that many books. I did not count these ahead of time. Honestly, some of them are getting their own reading vlog. In fact, most of them are for a single reading vlog, so I won't get too deep. Okay, let's start with Annihilation. This was a reread by Jeff Vandermeer. This is a book turned into a movie. It is a weird sci-fi book about some creature, perhaps alien, visiting Earth and creating this zone, this Southern Reach. I forget what it's called. The series is called Southern Reach Trilogy, and the Southern Reach is this zone where weird things are happening. And we're basically following this one scientist, biologist, who is telling a story through notebooks that she's recording her events in. And what we're seeing is her expedition into the zone as she begins to learn not just about the zone itself, but about the government response that she's a part of and the lies that she's been told as they sort of send her in there. Basically, she has this idea of what their job is, and she's starting to realize that what the government is telling about her is not true, and that it's much more fucked up than she realizes. In this book, I reread it because I remember enjoying it the first time, being very much confused. And I think it was still somewhat confused this time, but probably not as much. I think I appreciated it more. Vandermeer is one of those authors who just requires a bit of the reader. It takes some patience and it takes a little bit of effort. But Jesus, is it worth it? The way in which he crafts a story, the weirdness, is just so fascinating and excuse me, so compelling. It's very compelling. It's just really interesting. Like, the premise, the entire premise of this thing that is presumably an alien. I talk about it as an alien. I don't think we actually know what it is, at least not in the first book. It makes me think as a scientist, as an astrobiologist, thinking about life as we understand it and what could be happening in the situation. Even though I'm not a biologist in the situation, I still can't help but think about the interaction broadly of these two different forces and how they intersect, and how what we're reading, what that says about life on Earth and outside of it. And it's just really fascinating on so many levels as a scientist and just a sci-fi fan. So a really good book. I think I gave this between 3.5 to 4 stars, but I think I'm going to say a solid 4 stars actually as I talk about it. It's leaving me more positively I think it did the first time I read it. So a solid 4-star book. Maybe the confusion keeps it from being a 5-star. Now, let's talk about Nightmare Fuel, The Science of Horror Films. This book was a massive surprise. Oh, I don't want to get too deep into this because I want to do a standalone review. TLDR, this book is what I had hoped Dance Macabre by Stephen King would have been. Dance Macabre came out in like the 1980s. It was about horror films during that time. Only I appreciated that it felt very of its time. And it's not that it was like problematic or something like that. I'm talking about the scope of the analysis felt so narrow and so pinpointed that it does not withstand the test of time. Come to this book, and it is not just a historical accounting of horror films since the dawn of film, but also a scientific analysis of why it works so well. And when I started seeing the analysis of science, I was skeptical because I think some people, they try to have a scientific analysis, and I think it requires a certain level of skepticism going into it to appreciate what is science versus speculation within the realm of science. And it's a fine line. And I think especially when it comes to things like horror and how the brain reacts to it, there's some real possibility for pseudoscience to come about. And I think this does a really solid job, not just of avoiding that, but of justifying what it's saying, basically, with well described and well documented research, that in a way that isn't too like esoteric. And like on every level, this book worked perfectly. This will almost certainly be my top 10 nonfiction books of the end of the year. Now, the books that will be in a reading vlog, hopefully. I like making reading vlogs, but I don't know. I feel like I spend hours on them and I don't know how much people actually watch them. But I guess all that matters is that some of you actually enjoy them. That's all that really matters. So let's get into the books that I read for that vlog. There were 4 books that I read for the vlog. Let's start with The Brethren Inside the Supreme Court. This was honestly a really good historical fiction book, historical nonfiction, or even politics. At the time this book was written, it was in the 1970s, I think just after Roe v. Wade had been passed. And it was talking about the Warren Burger Court, which had preceded so basically we had something Warren followed by who was liberal, followed by Warren Burgers. And the Burgers Court was seeing the court go from its most liberal state, I think ever, to a very conservative state. And we go from a court that basically passed in a lot of, I guess, the 1950s and earlier type cases that we know as defining separation of church and state, the basic civil rights that began to be established before the civil rights law itself. And then we see the evolution of it into a more conservative court as we lose one by one the liberal justices for a more conservative court. And for me, it was a fascinating contrast to today, as we can see, I guess, how every little bit of power makes a difference. It changes how much of an impact they can have. The book itself, I think I gave 4 stars, maybe 3.5 to 4 stars. It's a compelling read. No, there's no doubt about that. But it's lazy. I think it's lazy writing. Woodward, I feel like, writes books that are just linear sets of events, and they're not really a coherent narrative. It's not that we as readers can't make a coherent narrative out of it. It's just, I think a good journalist should be able to take the facts and present them to make the point of what we're talking about. You shouldn't just be presenting facts and we get something out of it. I think it takes more work to make a really good book. And this didn't put in the effort to craft a real narrative that I think makes a solid book. Okay, next up, Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty by Dorothy Roberts. This is a book about the intersection of race, bodily autonomy, and gender, and also class. Honestly, this felt like we were going it's like you took Women Racing Class by Angela Davis, and now you went on to Women Racing Class 2.0. I loved it for that. I mean, this book was, I think, a solid 5 stars. It was a deep and difficult analysis of the topic at hand, but it's one that's definitely worth reading, and I think it's so poignant because it really highlights the impact of the most recent of the recent overturn of Roe versus Wade, and the impact that's going to have on Black women and the Black community specifically in a way that will always be more magnified than it is on the white community. That point is something that just needs to be remembered as we move forward with this growing level of denial of rights. No matter how many rights to take away, it's always going to be magnified to a more extreme extent to those who are already in a pre-existing oppressive structure. I did my best to describe that, and honestly, this book was so hard to vlog because it's how the hell am I supposed to encapsulate what's being discussed in this book when really you just need to fucking read it. It's not something that can be bottled down into one easy spiel to you. You just need to read it, and probably read it multiple times, as I do too. It's a phenomenal book, highly recommend. Next, Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College. This was underwhelming, 3.5 to 4 stars. Like, sure, I agree with it. I just felt like the writing was not the best. The structure of the narrative felt unfocused and not the most compelling. The Electoral College was established for reasons that aren't applicable today. It's as simple as that. More details are in the vlog itself, but it's not relevant. And it almost was gone before, and it's going to be almost gone eventually again, and there's hopes of how we might could do that without having to amend the Constitution. Next up, a much better book approaching a similar problem, but slightly different, Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate, and the Crippling of American Democracy. This book was talking about the filibuster. That's the short end of it. And this one was crafted in a similar way to let the people put the president, but it felt more focused. The writing felt more compelling, and it's easy to read. And I just found this book a much better book in contrast to Let the People Pick the President. I also thought it did a better job of making its case. Like, the filibuster was that it, as we know it today, is not historical. It was crafted and created through racist means for racist purposes, and it was never intended to be what it is, nor was the Senate intended to work this way. It's just absurd that the arguments are being made that way, which is easy. People are afraid of change. They don't like how things are today, but the idea of things being different means things could get worse. And it's an absurd, short-sighted way of looking at the world, and it's just not based in facts. This one I gave 4.5 to 5 stars. I don't remember exactly why I didn't give it a perfect 5 stars. I would say watch the vlog for those details. It's been a while, okay? I finished this in mid-July. It's been 2 months now. And then finally, that's all. We just did 5 books. Actually, no, I didn't have to book. I started reading Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, and honestly, I enjoyed the beginning of this in the same way that I enjoyed Pride and Prejudice. Like, I can appreciate her writing, what she's trying to do. But there's just something about these stories that I find very unappealing. And I don't like saying it because it's such a quintessential part of history, and I want to appreciate, at least on some level, the impact they've made on society. But the fact is, I just grew so detached from the narrative that I was like 30 or 40% into it, and I could have kept going, but it would not have made a lasting impact. Maybe I'll return to it one day. I don't know. I picked it up because I got granted the audiobook on Libby. I gave up on it. As simple as that. Let me know if you're watching this and you made it to the end. Thank you for yourself. Thank you. What is your favorite Jane Austen? Which one should I read next? I've already read Pride and Prejudice, and I'm willing to return to Northanger Abbey, or Northanger, whatever, however the hell you say it. Just tell me, if you're a fan of Jane Austen, which one should I read next? Wait, was it Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice? I always forget. It's the one Darby. Was it Mr. Darby? Mr. Darby and someone else? I don't remember. It tells you how impactful that book was to me. Like, I don't know if Jane Austen's for me, but I want to return to her, so tell me, what should I read next? This is horrible. This is horrible content, but we're here, we're done, and thanks for watching. Let me know what you read these last couple of months, how your months have been. Hopefully they've been better than mine. It's not going to be that hard. I will see you all next time, okay? And stay safe, okay? Goodbye.